So we had, I had the students kind of share with me what God did in their life. I had one student say, this weekend really refreshed and strengthened my beliefs. I feel like I really developed my relationship with God even more than it already was. I'm working on trusting God more. And the huddle groups, which is our small group time, really helped me connect with God and those who went to the camp. Another student wrote, God was tugging at my heart to finally realize that I have so much anger in my life that needs to be dealt with. I need to be more open about my feelings, trust God, and give Him more control in my life. Another student wrote, this weekend, God showed me that I don't need to do things to be loved. Isn't that pretty amazing to come to the point where you have to realize that you don't have to do things to be accepted and loved by God? And finally, because I'm still going to preach here just in a second, but another student wrote, this weekend I felt God come into my heart. Like, honestly, it doesn't get better than that. Amen. And so Neighborhood Church, God is at work in the lives of our students. God is at work in the lives of our kids. God is drawing them. He is loving them, and He is helping them navigate life. And I just wanted to share a couple of the stories of what happened. And every time you share on Facebook or help get the word out in some way on social media or talking to your friends and neighbors, every time you donate supplies, every time you volunteer time, every time you provide a scholarship, you become an investor. You become a link in the chain of some of these stories that I'm sharing with you today. And you become a part of these stories and of God working in the lives of young people. And so thank you. Next week is Youth Takeover Sunday. And I want to challenge you to come. Because not only that, but reach out to others that may not be here and encourage them to come. Drag them with you. I guarantee you, when you come next week, you will be encouraged by our young people ministering to you in the various ways that you're going to see. And you will be glad you came. I believe God will meet you in this place. And so I want you to start looking forward to next week and be part of this story. All right, so today we are continuing on in our series called I Need a Miracle. And I love the title of our series because it pretty much just says it all. Every single one of us in this room could probably make that statement and be authentic about it. I need a miracle. And so if that's you, then I want to encourage you to listen in, because we're going to be sharing stories over the next few weeks about supernatural miracles that will encourage us, as Pastor said last week, about who God is, about what God can do, and about the fact that God not only did miracles back then, but God does miracles today. Amen. And so last week, Pastor spoke about God's miracle of protection. And today I'm going to speak about God's miracle of provision. We live in California. And in California, which is home to some of the wealthiest people in America, they say that nearly 20% of Californians live in poverty. So that's 1 out of every 6 people in California are in poverty. But there's different kinds of poverty. You can be rich financially and broke emotionally. You can be rich financially and broke relationally. You can have a lot of responsibility and not a lot of joy. You can have a lot of joy, yet not a lot of influence. And we associate poverty with finances. But I think you can deal with poverty in a lot of different ways. I mean, you learn over time that everybody has a deficiency. We're not all that different. And so this morning we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 through 7. And the text involves a prophet by the name of Elisha. And Elisha had just finished solving the problems for 3 kings. And right after the story, he performs a miracle for a very wealthy woman. And so sandwiched in between these 2 miracles, where he's consulting political advisors and he's hanging out with the top donor, there's something that happens that seems so very small. But this is where my assignment is today, and I hope to apply it to our lives. Let's read it. It's 2 Kings chapter 4, and it says this. It says, the wife of a man from a company of prophets cried out to Elisha, Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. You know, sometimes we find ourselves in situations that are not the result of our disobedience. And this just makes me think, have you ever noticed that life does not make allowances for your crisis? Like the universe does not send out a memo, hey, be nice to him today, his wife is sick. Like it would be nice if life's demands would accommodate my crisis, but they don't. And so the bills are still due, although this woman did not have the means, and so it created a crisis. It wasn't a national crisis, it was a personal crisis. And I want you to see how this man of God, Elisha, took time for one woman just like he did for 3 kings. That touches my heart, because what it tells me is that God is right up in my life. You know, it doesn't matter what my title is or isn't. It doesn't matter what my checking account has or doesn't have. He makes time for me. And so she comes to him with his need, and it seems pretty small in the big scope of things. But she comes to him and she says this, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. Elisha replied to her, how can I help you? And it sounds like right here that he's about to pull out the checkbook and help her. But he does this weird move where he answers his own question with a question. And he says, or he asks, tell me what you have in your house. Your servant has nothing there at all, which is why I'm coming to you. If I had stuff to sell on eBay, I wouldn't be here because I would go sell it. I have nothing in my house except for a small jar of olive oil. Elijah said, verse 3, go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Which again makes you wonder, why is he asking her to go get empty jars? I mean, she doesn't need jars. She needs oil. She's broke. She doesn't need something to put nothing in. Or does she? Elijah said, go around, ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons, pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side. She left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, bring me another one. But he replied, there is not a jar left. Then the oil stopped flowing. Verse 7, she went and told the man of God, and he said, go, sell the oil, pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left. Now, the first thing that Elisha did when he became a prophet was to grab the mantle of the prophet who came before him, Elijah, who, by the way, is known for making strange commands as well. When Elijah called the false prophets up to Mount Carmel, you can read about this in 1 Kings 18, the people were in a drought. And Elijah said, whichever God answers by fire is the true God. And he was challenging their idolatry. And he got up on the mountain, and before he called down fire, he made sure that they pour water on the wood. Because sometimes God will make situations seem impossible to men. So that when that fire falls and the wood starts to burn, you won't think it's because of the quality of the firewood, but it's because of the power of God. So if you've got wet wood in your life, he's setting you up for something special because he wants all the credit. He wants all the credit. And so he allows this woman to get down to seemingly nothing. And you notice that when the prophet asked, what do you have in your house? Her first instinct was to say, nothing. Her first instinct was to minimize what little she had left. Now, I can't prove this. It's not in the text. But maybe she started to answer and Elijah made eye contact with her. Like awkward eye contact. I mean, have you ever had someone look at you a little too long and a little too hard? And you're just like, this is weird. Eye contact is good, right? But there comes a point where it can be a little weird. And so he asked her, and she says nothing. And he just looks at her. Really? Nothing? Because sometimes we get so overwhelmed by our scarcity that we minimize our supply. That's what complainers do. Ever have that person that just complains about everything? Like to the point where you have to ask, like, do you have anything going for you in your life? And their perspective is so jaded that they're so overwhelmed by how little they have that they can answer that question with no, nothing is working in my life. I have nothing in my life. But it's not true. They're walking, they're talking, they're breathing. They woke up this morning. It's not nothing. And so the first thing Elisha instructs this woman to do is the same true for us. And that is point number 1, check your oil. Check your oil. Is it possible that you are overlooking the very thing that God wants to do a miracle through? See, when you have lived in a deficit for so long, it can become difficult to appreciate the supply that you have. Especially when you've lost a lot. She lost a husband. She spent almost everything she had. She's only got a little bit of oil in a jar. And she doesn't even think that it's worth mentioning. So understand this. God is about to do a miracle through something that you don't even think is worth mentioning. Something so small, something so insignificant in your sight that your first instinct is to not even mention it. See, the enemy wants you to despise your oil because he can't steal it. See, oil in the Bible is symbolic of the Holy Spirit. When they would anoint a king in the Bible, they would anoint a king with oil. It represented God's empowerment. It represents God's joy and gladness. It's symbolic of the Holy Spirit that came on the day of Pentecost to live inside of us. And so we're not just talking about the oil that you keep in your pantry. We're talking about something in your heart, the gift that God gave you, the people God put in your life, the time He gave you, the season that you're in. And if I was your enemy and I knew that I couldn't take your oil, what I would do is to get you to think that your oil is so little that it wasn't even worth using. And that's why we can sit in church week after week and month after month and stay in our deficiency and never realize that what you got is something. My gift is something. My praise is something. My life is something. And when we spend too much time comparing our oil with other people, my oil may not be as much as yours. But God's not going to hold me accountable for your oil. We learned this from Elijah after the fire fell on Mount Carmel and the false prophets were dealt with. See, the people were in a drought. And Elijah tells his servant, he says, the sound of heavy rain is coming. Look, go and look and see if you see anything in the sky. And so the servant runs up the hill, takes a look. Nothing. Comes back down. Tells Elijah. Go look again. Nothing. 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 Go look. Hey, Jeff, can we get to the point? Because it's getting really old. How old do you think it would get if you were the one running to the top of the hill to look at nothing? And then by the time you see something, it's so small that you minimize it. The servant said, there's a cloud about the size of a man's hand, which all of us would say is most likely nothing. But we know the end of the story. And the end of the story is the rains came, the drought ended that day. See, it's not the size of the cloud that determines the size of the blessing. It's not the amount of oil. It's not how smart I am. It's not how educated I am. It's not even my own estimation of myself. Check your oil. It might not be much, but it is not nothing. I think it's harder than ever to feel okay about our oil because we got too many ways to check other people's oil. So the enemy can't take your gift. The enemy can't take your calling. And God doesn't change his mind about what he gave you. And so if the enemy can get you to think it's so little, what happens? We don't use it. And in that way, he can starve you. It's like this. God has given me many things in my life. He's given me my ministry. But if I give up my joy, I will forfeit my ministry. He's given me my marriage. But if I forfeit my joy, I will forfeit my marriage. The enemy can't take my marriage, but if he can get me to despise my oil, if he can get me to make me think that I'm not that good of a husband, or I don't have what it takes to be a very good dad, then I will begin to say it's nothing when really it's something. You need a miracle? Check your oil. The second thing he told this woman to do, and I think he's telling us today, and that is to keep pouring. Keep pouring. Notice by the end of the passage, this lady has a house full of oil, but it wasn't until she poured the oil that it became more. The reality is many times when you feel poor, you don't pour. Because you hold on to what you have. When you feel like a poor parent, it keeps you from wanting to try. When you feel like a poor spouse, it keeps you from wanting to try. Listen, there are things about me and there are things about you that make us feel insecure, and it makes us say it's nothing when really it's something. And it seems small. You see, when the need becomes so big compared to the supply, you call it nothing and you don't use it. And so it doesn't multiply. And so you send the crowds away when they can go get something to eat. You give away the opportunities that God gave you because you think it's nothing. And see, this is where I think I've got it wrong. Like I thought you had to go through some big thing. You know, like you had to go through something like maybe sexual abuse that gave you this traumatic shame to keep you from really trusting God. Or maybe you had to go through a season of your life where you made some poor choices and you found yourself in prison and you live with regrets. But I found out that it's the seemingly insignificant insecurities that make you feel like I'm not a real man. I'm not a real mom. Because now I'm yelling at my daughter just like my mom yelled at me, and I'm repeating this cycle, and it causes you to despise your oil. And that's exactly what the enemy wants, to use small things to get you to miss what God wants to do in your life. Because your miracle is hidden in what you've been overlooking. And the reason you've been overlooking is because it seems small to you. And the reason it seems small to you is because you're insecure about what you're not. And so the enemy will work on you until you call it nothing. What do you have to be grateful for? Nothing. Really? Nothing? What are you good at? Nothing. Really? I was with some students, and I was just asking, hey, what are you guys really good at? It took a really long time to answer. And I think if we were to break up into small groups right now, don't worry, we're not. And we were to ask that question around, I just read your mind for a minute. Break up small groups? What? No. I don't like that. What are you really good at? It might take around this a long time to answer. Because we're so humble? Or because the enemy has messed with us so much now that we are familiar with our deficiencies. See, when you've been looking at your deficiency for a while, it overshadows the oil that you have. He wants you to despise the oil that you have. He wants you to despise the season of life that you're in. He wants you to think about how much time you had back before, how much time you're going to have when. Meanwhile, the question of the prophet isn't what do you wish that was in your house? Rather, what do you have left? Because that is what God is going to bless. What you have left. He's going to bless what He gave you. You're His chosen vessel, and the oil you have is the oil you need. The strengths you have are the strengths you need. The experiences you've had are the experiences you need. But notice this, that the oil only flows when it is poured. You can pray over it, you can cry over it, you can wish for it, but until you pour it, it will stay one small jar. And if the enemy can't take your oil, he's going to try to get you to stop pouring. And some of you have stopped pouring. Because you've gotten your heart broken. You poured out your love. And it didn't work out and you got hurt. And so you stopped pouring. And when you stop pouring, it stopped flowing. You used to encourage people. But you got discouraged. And so you stopped encouraging. Listen, our mentality is this. I will pour more when I get more. And maybe this morning, the only thing you're going to get out of this message is to rearrange that thinking. Because that's not how it works in God's economy. God's way of doing things is it becomes more as it gets poured. I mean, isn't it just like God to ask you to pour something that you don't feel like you have enough of? It's a strange instruction. I don't have much, pour it out. But honestly, I think this stuff works. Like, I'm convinced of it. Because I've tried that thing where you feel sorry for yourself, when you get discouraged. And I've tried that other thing where you encourage someone else when you felt discouraged. And the first one took me deeper into my deficit and my discouragement. The second one, it's like the weirdest thing. Because I don't feel like I had it to give. I wanted someone to encourage me. And the bitterness will keep you from pouring what you have while you wait for what you want. And so you stay poor and you stay frustrated and you stay stuck and you stay in bitterness. And I wonder if this woman was a little disappointed. Disappointed that the prophet asked her to pour something. It's frustrating when you have to pour into somebody else when you really wish someone would pour into you. Yet the more you pour, the more it flows. I'm just telling you what to do next time. I know you haven't had any struggles lately. But the next time you go through something, the more you pour, the more it flows. And the devil's crafty. He'll get you in a state of mind where you will tell yourself, nobody appreciates me. And so you will stop giving yourself. And it will reinforce this self-fulfilling prophecy. Nobody appreciates me, so they won't appreciate you because you'll stop pouring and they no longer have anything to appreciate about you. You guys follow that? This past spring, I ripped up part of our backyard and I built a fancy garden. Because Vicky wanted to grow some things. And so I built her this garden. And soon she was growing vegetables. She was growing giant cucumbers. I brought them by the office. The pastor's like, is that legal? We're in California. So squash. I mean, she had all kinds of stuff, and green beans and watermelons, and we grew jalapenos. One of the craziest things that she grew was purple bell peppers. Purple bell peppers. And so she'd make dinner with these fancy purple bell peppers. And at one point, she's, you know how sometimes people just kind of talk, like not like anybody's listening, but I was listening. And she's like, why am I even doing this? She's just so frustrated. Because we have a teenager, and my teenager would be much more happy with mac and cheese. I mean, you ever felt that way? Like you put in so much time and effort. I mean, she raised those purple bell peppers from a seed. Cultivated them into this fancy vegetable. Prepared it. Ever feel like you put all this effort, all this time, and nobody really appreciates what you do? I know exactly how she feels. I work with teenagers and kids. I feel that way sometimes when I'm preaching. The devil will tell me they don't really care. They're not going to remember this sermon. They don't care about all the time and effort that I've put in. It's the craziest thing. I get into all this self-pity. They don't appreciate my purple bell peppers. My scriptural, biblical purple bell peppers. I told Vicky, I said, even if you don't cook for anybody else, keep cooking those peppers for me. It's not about everybody else. Let our teenagers eat noodles. Keep cooking the bell peppers for me. You got to have some sense in your life that I'm not doing it for them. Because sometimes you will pour into people and they won't say a word. But they're not your source. Parents, grandparents, church, they're not your source. I may be pouring into people, but I'm pouring for the Lord. And I can keep pouring if you appreciate me. I can keep pouring if you don't. I can keep pouring if you stay. I can keep pouring if you walk out. And I'm so thankful that God kept pouring into me when I seemed so unprofitable. So I got to keep pouring. It says she kept pouring. I wonder how stupid she felt when she first started. She knows how much was in that little jar. Okay, I'm going to pour. But it says she kept pouring. But once it kind of worked out, I bet you it was kind of fun. Give me another one. Give me another one. This is so cool. How many we got? 42. All right. It's interesting. Elijah said, go around, ask all your neighbors for empty jars. And then it says she shut the door behind her sons and they brought the jars to her. She made her kids go to the neighbors and ask for the jars. Isn't that funny? Elisha said, hey, you need to go to, she goes, kid, you heard what the man said. You guys go. Get out there. I'm not. Get out there. We make our kids do this stuff, right? Some of us are, that's why we had kids. You need a miracle, check your oil. You need a miracle, keep pouring. The next thing he told this woman, he's telling us today, is what enabled her to pour. And this is what she said. He said, shut the door. And I think it's just an important detail because it's what you pour out in private when no one is looking. See, a lot of us are praying for more oil, more opportunity, more. And God is saying, pour, pour, pour. The more you pour, the more it flows. So you're never going to pour what you have when you're so busy consulting what everybody else has. When we do that, we're like the woman who poured out that expensive fragrance and perfume on the feet of Jesus. And all the men stood around and called it a waste. But she called it worship. Because you're always going to feel like it's not enough. And even when you feel like it's enough, you begin to feel like it doesn't matter. Have you had a day this past week when you felt like this doesn't even matter? shut the door, and keep pouring. In fact, sometimes the best thing you can do is shut your mouth and keep pouring. The oil only becomes more when it's in motion. You need a miracle? Check your oil. You need a miracle? Keep pouring. You need a miracle? Shut the door. And the final thing he told this woman to do, he's telling us today, is to ready the vessels. The oil flowed when the vessels were ready. I actually don't think this story is so much about the oil at all. I think it's about the vessels. Because when Elisha told her to go around to her neighbors, which she then told her kids to go do, he requested a very specific type of vessel. He said, make sure that it's empty. Because God can't fill what's already full. That's why it's so important to pour out our pride. That's why it's so important to pour out our own opinions and come before the Lord empty. Because listen, when the vessels are ready, the oil will flow. This is 2 Kings 4. If we jump a couple centuries and go to 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7, this is where Paul says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay. Why would God put something so special and so valuable in something that is so easily cracked? See, what keeps you from showing up is your cracks and your conflicts. But that's the very place that the blessings will flow through. Paul says we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not us. As the worship team comes, I love what I do. Working with kids, working with students, being a pastor. But if I'm to be honest with you, there's been moments that I don't feel over the last 20, 23 years. There's been moments that I haven't felt like I'm the pastor that they need. There's been moments that I feel not enough. And maybe you've felt at points in your life too, like you're not enough. I can remember one time struggling with those feelings and I told Vicky. I said, I just don't feel like I'm the pastor they need. And Vicky looks back at me. We planned that just to make this moment a little bit more intense. Vicky looked back at me and just cold-blooded looks at me and says, well, you're the one they've got. That was told to me, but I want to say it to you. You're the mom they've got. You're the dad they've got. You're the grandparent they got. You're the son they got. You're the daughter they got. You're the one God chose. And you are His chosen vessel. He chose you not in spite of your cracks, but because of them. So let that sink in for a moment. He didn't choose you in spite of your cracks. He chose you because of them. Because that ensures that people will not compliment the vessel, but they will value the oil. You're the one they got. It's what God put inside of you, but you got to pour it out. As we close tonight, would you stand with me? Pastor said last week, he said, this is not a history lesson. This is a faith challenge. Maybe you've been in a deficit emotionally. Maybe you've been in a deficit relationally. Maybe you've been in a deficit spiritually. Maybe you've been in a deficit financially. I don't know the miracle that you need. Deficits come in many different varieties. But if you're an empty vessel today, and if you have come to the end of yourself, I've got good news for you. That is the place it all begins. For God's supply to be poured out into your life. Philippians 4:19, and my God shall supply all of my needs according to his great riches and glory in Christ Jesus. Not according to my quantity of oil, not according to what I have or don't have, but according to his glorious riches. My hope is that you will see yourself as a vessel that God is ready to fill. And when the vessel's are ready, what happens? The oil flows. It's good when you feel empty. It's good when you feel like you're not enough. It's good when you know your need, because then you remember your source. And right now in this moment, I want to ask you that everyone who needs a touch from God today, in an area of your life that you have been feeling deficient, we're going to open the altars and we're going to call you to the front right now. We did it last week. We're going to do it today. We're going to do it next week. We're going to do it the week after as we close out this series. But this is the response time. If you need a miracle, as Ashley begins to sing, I'm going to ask that you find a place up front. I'm going to ask that you close your eyes, that you lift your hands toward heaven, that you forget about the people around you, and you check your oil. And don't minimize it. We need to evaluate, are we pouring or are we holding on? It's time to shut the door for a moment today and to ready our vessel, empty ourselves of all our junk that we've just put in there because it's just a place to fill. We tend to fill empty places when really that's God's job to do. Allow Him to fill the empty place. I believe He wants to do that today. I believe He wants to do that this morning. So let's come before God with sincerity, with honesty, just like this woman did with this prophet. There is oil in your house. There is a reason to be grateful. There is strength in this season of your life. There is a miracle that God has for you. Come.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, it's working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, moving